Richard Quest, good morning and thank you for this interview.
Hi, good evening to you. Good evening, or good morning, I should say, from New York.
So how do you exit a global crisis when you don't know when it ends?
I think you have to understand that the recession was man-made in the sense that we closed economies down, thereby forcing ourselves into recession. And by the same token, as we reopen economies, so growth will return and the recession as such will come to an end. I'm not worried about the technical recession that comes from 2 negative quarters of GDP. That is going to come to an end. You know, we talk about a V shape. Well, we come down the V shape and we're going up the other part. I'm much more concerned about how much comes back, how quickly we restart. What is the rate of growth that we manage to achieve? How many of those jobs that are lost or have been lost during COVID never come back? If you look this morning at the United States, we got job numbers from the US, new job numbers. They were good. They were very good. The rate of unemployment has come down, but not much. And so the recession will come to an end as sure as day follows night. But how bright that day is will be the issue.
How much money should governments pour into economies and how big the deficit can be?
Don't worry about deficits. This is not the time to concern ourselves with how much we're borrowing. I think in total it's something like the IMF says something like 13 trillion has been added on in one way or another. So we're talking very, very sizable amounts. But the alternative is even worse. So in the UK, the debt to GDP ratio is now over 100%, heading the same way in the United States. There will be more stimulus coming from major economies. Yes, don't get me wrong, Attila. There will be a moment where we do have to look at the borrowings being made and whether that means higher taxes, greater austerity. But when you are fighting the fire, you don't worry about the amount of water you're using and the cost of the fire engine. You wait until, we will have to have that moment of reckoning, but not yet.
So actually, you are encouraging governments to put hands into the pockets and throw money out to the people.
Well, whoa. I didn't say that last bit. It's that last bit where you went off the rails. How do you spend this money? Now, let's take the US, which initially did helicopter money by sending money to everybody in the country. That was okay for the moment, even though $1 billion went to dead people. But then you now have this question of what's the next level of stimulus? Now, central banks across the world, Israel as well, have done all sorts of highly unorthodox things to create growth and to prevent people going bankrupt. But now, again, it gets tricky because we're into the second phase of this. What is the right form of stimulus necessary? Is it lower VAT? Is it increasing job protection plans? Is it extending unemployment benefits, health and welfare benefits? We're at a point now where economies are probably, they're still sort of on life support, but what sort of stimulus is best advocated? And it'll be different for different economies at different points in the cycle. But more needs to be done. And to your last point, spend, don't worry. The time for worrying about that will come soon enough.
Knowing the Israeli economy, do you think it's going to take longer or shorter for the Israelis to get out of the crisis?
I ask you the question, why should it be any harder or any easier than anybody else?
Well, perhaps because of Startup Nation and high tech and everything.
If that's your premise, then it'll be easier because what we've learned is digitization has been accelerated. Working from home, the requirement of offices is no longer as great. The need to digitize both production, administration, our daily lives. The very fact you and I are talking like this shows a difference. Israel is at the forefront of that sort of technology. The NASDAQ is back at record highs. Therefore, on that metric, it would be a bonus for Israel. But Israel has other issues as well in terms of manufacturing, in terms of its neighbors, in terms of its defense requirement. All of these other issues make it more problematic. However, the very, very strong, stringent methods taken by the Prime Minister, and I'm not making a political point here, when Netanyahu was shutting down the economy and refusing to allow people back without quarantining and shutting the doors down, everyone said he was mad. There's a certain prescience in what Israel did, in that you didn't suffer nearly as bad as others. Now, the test is, who are you going to let back in? How are you going to reopen fully? How are you going to allow that to happen? Those are issues that will affect Israel like everybody else. I think you're well placed, but I wouldn't say it's comfortable.
Would you give a medal for the Israeli government for the first wave? Because the second one looks much worse.
The second wave isn't being managed by anybody. It's too soon to talk about how we're managing the second wave. I think you do get a medal for the first part. Yes, everybody thought you were mad when you were closing down the economy. But as the Prime Minister said at the time, Israel's a very, very small country, and the ability for one person to arrive infected and wreak havoc was sizable. Now, did you lose the plot later on? Arguably. But if you look at the United States, where I am, now, bear in mind, this crisis started in January, February. By March and April, most countries were at the zenith. April, May, June, fine. But this country, the United States, had 52,000 cases yesterday, new cases, that can't be simply explained away by more testing, which there is, but not a huge amount more. So the United States is well and truly in reverse. Other countries, Germany, arguably France, possibly Israel, certainly the United Kingdom, have hotspots and they have outbreaks. Now, a hotspot in Israel becomes de facto the whole country because of the size of the country. So the Israeli challenge, I heard it put very well. If our goal is to reopen economies and accept a higher level that's manageable within healthcare, we're going the right way, except for the United States. If our goal is to eradicate the virus, then we're not. We are a long way from eradicating the virus. And you only need to look at what happens in Australia at the moment, a country that thought it had brilliantly done it, until the Victoria state suddenly had an outbreak that was imported from a hotel where people were staying. They've got 50, 60, 70 cases, whatever it is. And suddenly Australia's Victoria province is now, state is well and truly in a crisis again. Yeah. And the same is true for Israel. It will be very easy to lose the gains we've made.
Do you really believe that annexation can hurt Israel? Because, we saw all these warnings before U.S. took the embassy to Jerusalem and nothing happened, actually.
Well, I don't think so on this one. I don't think so. And the reason is annexation is more serious and much more of a, the embassy was symbolic and frankly didn't really affect anybody else. But the annexation goes to the heart of many policies that other countries, third nations have, the European Union, for example, have. And it's widely a controversial policy. So how that is handled and the ramifications could be more serious than the embassy issue. And it begs the question, I mean, if anybody, it reminds me of It's a Good Day to Bury Bad News. The whole sort of wag the dog stall movie idea. Let's get these things done when everybody else is looking the other way in terms of COVID and economies and recession. And I think there's a certain truth in that. Oh, yeah. I think if you want to railroad through something that is highly unpopular with other people, you do it now when they are way more busy making sure that their own house doesn't fall down to worry about whether your house is smoldering.
Israel has now two prime ministers, one acting, one alternate. Do you believe that such a government can really act and make decisions with two prime ministers sitting around the table? Do you know any kind of other examples where it worked?
Well, it's been done before in Israel. You've had rotating prime ministers before. So that in itself is not new. 6 months, I can't remember whether it was a year or whatever it was. One took one side, one took the other.
Yeah.
What I think needs to be fully understood is the relationship between these two prime ministers that you've currently got. Are they Is there a leader and a follower? Is the second merely going to replace the first? You know, the theory is the policies being put forward should be ones that they can both sign on to. Therefore, there is continuity across. The reality is anything but. Let's not forget, these two men do not like each other. They did not. They fought each other several times at the polls. This is, I won't even say, this is not even a marriage of convenience. This is a marriage of desperation, born out of the fact that one didn't want to face the electorate again. The other feared facing the electorate again. The country was about to say a plague on both of you. And therefore, in this environment, you know, the French have a phrase when the president and the prime minister and the assembly are from different parties, they call it cohabitation. This is not cohabitation. This is worse. This is living together without benefit of clergy or electorate for the purposes of expedience, recognizing that you will shove the other one out of the door at the first opportunity.
Richard, my last question would be about flights and tourism. You spend a lot of time on planes for many years now. Do you still believe that you will go back to flying as you did in the past?
No, of course not. My first flight, by the way, is scheduled for July the 10th. This is the longest period in 40 years that I haven't flown somewhere. I'm flying New York to London on, I think it's the 10th or the 11th of July. It's going to be different. The service on board will be different, absolutely. I'm told that I have to wear a mask throughout the flight, and some airlines require that mask to be changed every 4 hours. The meal service will be rudimentary rather than luxurious. I will have to quarantine for 2 weeks when I get to the United Kingdom. But let me ask you this. Will the plane take off? Well, yes. Will the engines keep going? Yes. Will the pilot know the way? Yes. Therefore, it's the same flight.
Richard Quest, CNN, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.